Policing protests during COVID is a no-win situation. France 9 police officers enforcing lockdown rules on protesters are in a no-win situation, a federation leader has claimed, amid criticism of the handling of the Sarah Everard withdrawal. National Voice chairman of the Police Federation of England and Wales, Chan Donald says, officers are damned if they do take action and damned if they don't. He says, ultimately, frontline officers have become pawns in a political situation. There is little reiterate the call for clarity around COVID-19 regulations to avoid further confusion over laws and rules when lockdown measures are lifted. The government's mixed messages added to the escalation of events on Saturday. Currently, there is no definitive answer as to whether a protest is legal in lockdown. Police forces are expected to look at each demonstration individually and weigh up the rights to protest versus the risk to public health. An inquest into the death of Sarah Everard is likely to be opened later this week. Kent County Council's coroner's service say a date for the first hearing has not yet been set as the coroner is awaiting further information from the police. A statement from the coroner's office say thousands march against sexual assault in Australia. It is not only in the UK that people have been highlighting the sexual abuse and harassment of women. Tens of thousands of people have turned out to marches across Australia, spurred by a recent wave of allegations of sexual assault. The protests were again organized a week ago after Attorney General Christian Porter revealed he was the subject of a 1988 rape allegation, which he denies. Bethany Hankins, an ex-political advisor who separately alleged last month that she was raped in a minister's office in 2019, spoke to dozens of protesters outside Parliament House earlier. There is a horrible societal acceptance of sexual violence experienced by women in Australia, she said. My story was on the front page for the sole reason that it was a painful reminder to women that if it can happen in Parliament House, it can surely happen anywhere. Today, protests realized, known as the March for Justice, took place in 40 locations across Australia, ranging from major cities such as Canberra, Sydney, and Melbourne to smaller country towns. Women must feel properly heard. Earlier we told you the Prime Minister has spoken of the country's shock and grief at what happened to Sarah Everard. Here's a video of Boris Johnson talking to the BBC during his visits to a bus depot in Coventry. He says women in particular must feel that when they make serious complaints about violence, about assault, that they are probably heard and probably adjusted, and we are going to make sure that that happens. We drive decisions down to government priorities. Barrister, a human rights lawyer, has suggested decisions about whether veterans can go ahead or down to government priorities. Adim Wanley was one of the barristers who represented the organizers of the redrive for Sarah Everett in Friday's High Court hearing over whether the event could take place. Speaking on Monday, he said, "The government has such power over the lockdown regulations that it can bring in new ones with the swish of a minister's pen. It could clarify the law tomorrow to ensure the right to protest is protected. It's about priorities." The barrister who works for Dorothy Street Campbell highlighted incidents during the pandemic where allowance had been making law for particular events to go ahead. In November, coronavirus regulations included some exceptions for outdoor commemorations for Remembrance Sunday and Armistice Day, and roller as the government also included an exception for goose shooting in September. You might assume that the government concluded such events were not a significant risk and important enough to permit, he says, and yes, they are allowing the police to act as if outdoor socially distanced protests or vigils are banned outright. It is about priorities. Police in Wales oversaw redress respectfully, Education Minister. Police in Wales should be commended for the way they handled the redress, paying respects to Sarah Everett, the Education Minister told a briefing. Kirsty Williams says the clashes between protesters and police at Camp Hall Common in London on Saturday would have shocked those watching, but she phrased the way gatherings in Wales were held without incident. "Can I say how grateful I am to women and men in Wales who over this weekend also carried out vigils to make the death of Sarah and the wider issues that death makes us confront as a society, and the police that oversaw those gatherings in a really respectful way. We have to remember we are still in the middle of a pandemic, and we need people to be cognizant of that. But I would commend both those that wanted to have their voice heard this weekend in Wales and police for the sensitive way that they was handled. Crime bill will not impinge on rights to protest. Meanwhile, Downing Street has said the right to free speech will never be in question and defended changes to the policing of protests in legislation going through Parliament. The Prime Minister's spokesman defended the police crime sentencing and court bill, saying the measures it contained were in no way impinging on the right to protest. Peaceful protest is fundamental to our society, the spokesman said, adding that parts of the bill were in response to increasingly disruptive tactics seen in recent years. Country united in shock and grief over Sarah Everett. The Prime Minister said the country is delighted in shock and grief about what happened to Sarah Everard. Boris Johnson says the fundamental issue for society is that people, but women in particular, must feel that when they make serious complaints about violence, about assault, that they are properly heard and properly addressed. We've got to recognize that the tragedy and horrific crime that we've seen in the case of Sarah Everard has unleashed a wave of feeling from people, from women above all, who do worry about their safety at night, he added. The Prime Minister pointed out the Commons would be discussing and voting on during the debate about the police crime sentencing and cost bill, new measures that the government is bringing in for tougher sentences for rapists and new measures to tackle domestic violence. I hope those go through, he said. However, Rise of Women, a campaign group, says the bill's focus is all wrong, and it fails to introduce long-coded for measures that could reduce violence against women and girls.